You're going to do 435 school first?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
I
Get it on record.
originally had three things in front of you tonight, but I did take one off for tonight, and hopefully we'll be back with that at another date. That's a land development issue. But the first matter on your agenda is 435 School Road. For the record, for some familiar faces, some not as familiar, I'm Rob Lewis from Kaplan Stewart. I represent the applicant in this matter, which is Ridge Pike Car Connection. They do business as Raceway Kia. My clients operate a retail automobile dealership, if you're not familiar with it, along Ridge Pike in Conshohocken portion of the township. That dealership, if you've been over there, has been pretty substantially affected by the widening of Ridge Pike. That effect is not only short-term during construction, but long-term in terms of they lost significant portions of their property for that widening. And that has limited their ability to store inventory. For those that are or are not involved in the car industry, I've had the pleasure of representing a number of them. Inventory is critical to them. One, all of their loans, all of their financing is based on their inventory, so they have to keep that inventory secure. But also when it comes to the manufacturer to dealer relationships, if you don't order and take delivery of a certain amount of inventory, you get bumped down the priority list, which is dramatically impactful when you have competitive dealerships. So they need to take in large amounts of inventory to keep themselves in the pecking order and have that inventory available not only for the customers, but to make sure that they can get the vehicles that they want each time a new vehicle rolls out. It is something that the auto industry has unfortunately had in place for a long time, and I'm seeing challenges with inventory all over the place. I represent a number of automobile dealerships, and the same problems are coming up left and right. Many of the dealerships are looking for room to expand for their inventory purposes. I just went through a nearly identical situation in Abington Township, where a dealer that owns a number of dealerships down Easton Road needed to acquire property at the Willow Grove Mall simply to handle their inventory. What my clients have done here is enter into a license agreement with the owner of 435 School Lane. 435 School Lane is about 10.7 acre property, pretty close to the turnpike. The property itself is improved with about 160,000 square foot former office building. That office building has been vacant or mostly vacant for quite some time. Right now, technically, there's a lease for about 50% of the square footage. It's about 90-ish thousand square feet of that is occupied. But as most people know, occupancy on a square footage basis is nothing like what it used to be in terms of the number of people coming and going from the office. I personally go to the office once a week now. A lot of us, I think, still experience that. So the demands on the parking facilities that are there are pretty low, not just because of the occupancy rate, but the number of people there. What my clients have done is enter into a license agreement that would allow them to utilize a portion of that existing parking lot to store their inventory. They have a license that would allow them to store up to 70 vehicles in that parking lot. The vehicles would only be accessible to employees. This is not a location now that customers could come and browse the inventory. The vehicles also would not be delivered to that location from the manufacturer, so you don't have large trucks with large car haulers coming to the location. All inventory has to be received officially at the dealership, and dealership employees would be the only ones moving vehicles over there. That allows you also, obviously, to consolidate that inventory in a slightly smaller footprint because you don't have to worry about utilizing standard parking spaces. You can pack the inventory in, and the facility would also be secured by a fence. A fence permit was already issued to allow them to keep that inventory secure. I did include in your packet, and I have with me just kind of a general layout of the site, and maybe I'll hold this up. This is the 435 property. As you can see, the property really has two distinct parking fields currently that serve it. The one that is generally utilized by the employees that occupy the building is to the northeast, and then there's an additional parking lot to the southwest. Our license allows us to utilize this parking field down to the southwest. The fence does exist today, encompassing that area. Importantly, the fencing does not preclude circumnavigation of the building. So, God forbid, there's a need for a fire truck, ambulance, or anything that has to get around the building, that can still occur. And this portion of the parking lot simply is not utilized. It is a license agreement, so that license agreement, unlike, say, a lease that might have 5-10-year term, and it's hard to kick somebody out with a lease, a license agreement is a terminable agreement. So if the owner of the building were to get a new tenant that wants to occupy the remainder of the space and now parking becomes necessary for that tenant, they do have the ability to terminate that license and remove those vehicles. So our request to the zoning hearing board is to allow for that parking. Your zoning officer determined that the storage of inventory does not fit within any of the existing use classifications, even though the property is zone limited industrial. So we have requested a variance to permit the storage of that inventory in that southwestern portion of the parking lot. No other improvements are proposed. We're not adding any impervious coverage. We're not adding anything other than the fence and the inventory. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
One note, I think you pointed to the wrong section of the lot. Or to the bottom, I think it's
You know what? This plan's upside down, and that's why I did, Joel. Thank you. Sorry, the larger portion of the parking lot up here, because they do have 70. This only has about 56 parking spaces, I believe, out in that lot.
So you're going to be in the top.
In the top portion of the parking field. Thanks, Joel.
And the use has already taken place, FYI.
Correct.
No findings of penalties.
Yeah,
Zoning hearing.
when Raceway Kia was discussing the matter with the landlord, and when the landlord hired a fencing contractor who supposedly knew their way around Plymouth Township, this was before I was involved, fencing contractor said, oh no, you can just park vehicles there, and they thought they were okay. And luckily Joel gave us the heads up that, hey, you need not only a fence permit, but you also need to go in and get relief from the zoning hearing board. So we're trying to tend to that.
The neighbors, I'm sorry, was the neighbors were notified, this was residences up front there?
Correct. And that's actually how we were notified originally, was somebody called and asked if there was a permit for the fence, and that's what Mark said.
Any objections from the residents?
The one that complained, but I don't see him here today.
Anything else from the council? Lonnie, anything from you?
No.
Brian? Neil? Brittany?
I'm sorry if there is this. Who's the current occupant? They're staying, right?
They are. The current occupant is, I have their name, Optinova. I was not familiar with them. They are, I believe, some sort of medical tubing company.
Solely curiosity.
Yeah,
Extrusion, plastic extrusion.
plastic extrusion and,
In the years it was Dave Marco or Marco family.
correct.
It's the same idea. Marco went bankrupt. Someone came and bought them, consolidated to half the building.
How much space do you utilize in the building?
These are representatives of the landlord, but
I was just curious on the, like.
they technically occupy, I believe their lease is 90,000 square feet
Roughly.
for their lease, out of 163,000. Yeah. There's substantial vacant space, unfortunately.
Not really, just from talking to Joel, though, it seems like the township's playing catch-up here with utilization of it and also fencing of it. I think just from the point forward, it's approved. Should let be a policeman.
Agreed. And luckily, once they heard from Joel, they reached out to me, and I was able to try and help them navigate the process.
Any special lighting, security that needs to be done to maintain cars and safety?
the fence is considered sufficient for them.
Okay, no concerns about vandalism or anything?
I don't believe so. It's a pretty quiet area, luckily. I mean, most of Plymouth is relatively quiet, and I think that's not only were they looking for a space that's reasonably close, but they want to make sure that their vehicles are secure and they feel comfortable with this space.
Okay, so the motion before us is to special variance in the zoning that will allow outdoor storage inventory of automobile dealership. Do you have a motion?
I'll make a motion in support of the use, to the zoning hearing board in support of the use variance for 435 Central.
Is there a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much. I'm going to continue, but
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great night.
I'll jump right in. I know Lonnie's in a rush.
Take your time. You need to go to the bathroom?
I'm good. If I had the third one, I probably would have needed a break, but here I think I'm okay. The next matter on your agenda, a little bit of different procedural context as well. It's a special exception for 3043 Walton Road. Again, I believe all the materials I have with me I did provide in the packet, and this is a matter that we did get out in front of and have actually had multiple meetings with township staff about this project before filing any kind of application. 3043 Walton Road is the old healthcare advocate building, and it's an interesting site. It also is about 10 acres right along Walton Road, most of which is zoned campus industrial. But the front portion, as with most of the properties along Walton Road, is actually zoned A residential. They received a variance many, many years ago for Health Advocate to utilize the A residential portion as a parking facility, because Healthcare Advocate at its peak had something like 400 plus employees there. My clients purchased that property. It's completely vacant now, and with the intent to rehab that building and reuse that building. As I mentioned, we had met with township staff about various concepts for redevelopment and reuse of that existing building. The building itself is in good shape. Obviously, the office market is not in good shape, so they don't foresee that building as being releasable for traditional office space. The client engaged brokers and did market analysis, and what they believe the best conversion of that existing building would be for a flex use. Flex use can be anything from contractors' offices to minor, like assembly and fabrication uses. When we were talking with staff, I referenced kind of the Pierce Phelps building that's around the corner. It's a larger user, but same idea, where you have somebody that needs to store materials and equipment, may do some assembly while they're there, but then they're generally running out to job sites. The building has very high ceilings, which is nice for that type of use. The building also at one point in time had a number of loading dock doors. Many of them have been filled in with brick, but they're, from a structural standpoint, the brick can just be knocked out and recreated. So what my client is proposing to do with this facility, and I included a potential floor plan layout, is really to take that existing building and be able to carve the interior space into varying sizes of suites for various flex users. They have seen a dramatic amount of interest in those kinds of spaces. It can be anything from like an electrical contractor that you don't want them parking their work truck, at home in their driveway, and maybe they need to store wire and, other parts. Same with plumbers and various other contractors. And this gives them that opportunity to find a reasonable size space for whatever their need is, and a place to have that use local and outside of your own driveway and things like that. They've gotten a lot of interest from varying sizes of contractors at this point. The space could very well also be used for office and administrative functions for those types of users. The nice thing about the way the building is set up is we do have a lot of flexibility in terms of the square footages that we can carve the building into. If somebody only wants 2,000 square feet, we have the ability to do that. They're centralized corridors. If somebody comes in and wants 10,000 square feet for their business, we can do that as well. As a side note, we have actually gotten some pretty significant interest also in various fitness users. And everything from Taekwondo type studios to things that would be more like an Orange Theory, those kinds of things. We're not asking for approval from the zoning hearing board for those users. We understand we would have to file separate applications for those because they are not specifically permitted uses in that district. We do think they're attractive. Some of you may recall I was here not too long ago about the dance studio that actually is in the property adjoining this. They're good uses to have around, but we would have to come back for that. Meeting with staff agreed that under the zoning ordinance interpretation that flex use is a permitted use because you have a number of different use categories, and by the time you combine them, that really encompasses the general definition of flex use. And we agreed that we would need to come in and seek a special exception. The one kind of unique challenge here, I usually like to have a client tell me who the tenant is exactly, so I can come in and answer any questions about a specific tenant for the Planning Commission and then ultimately the Zoning Hearing Board. I'm not able to do that in this situation. It's not prohibitive. The case law provides very clearly that you can obtain a special exception or conditional use without knowing the tenant. It's really the use concept that you're asking for approval of. So that's what we're trying to do because many of these tenants, one of the first questions that we keep getting is, how quickly can you get me in? And then they call me and I say, well, you need a special exception for your use because it's flex. You're probably talking 90 to 120 days before we know. And for many of those tenants, they're just going somewhere else to start looking somewhere else that they can get in more quickly. So after talking with staff, they did not seem to have any objection to us coming in and trying to seek approval from the Zoning Hearing Board simply for flex use of the building. We did discuss with staff that each tenant obviously still has to go through a building permit process, a use and occupancy permit process, during which they would have to demonstrate that they are a flex user whose individual components of their use are permitted. It doesn't give us just carte blanche to do whatever we want in that building. It's simply recognizing that those users are appropriate for that building, and during the building permit and use and occupancy permit process, they would have to still demonstrate compliance with that general use category. Last piece, I promise, Lonnie. Ample parking, 400 plus spaces for the building. So there is that opportunity that if you do, we don't think we're going to have like Horizon Services, obviously, that has huge fleets of vehicles. But if you do have a smaller contractor that does have 5 or 6 work vans, the parking lot sets up wonderfully to have that space. Generally speaking, all of our surrounding uses are commercial in nature, so there's no impact to adjoining residences. Possibly even more important from an impact standpoint, most of those users tend to be off-peak users. Contractors tend to start 6 or 7 in the morning and finish at 3 in the afternoon, as opposed to standard business hours. Everybody that drives Walton Road knows how busy and congested that intersection is. So we are anticipating that this will have less of a traffic impact than if it were released for 400 people in an office building. You're not going to have that influx of traffic in the morning and that exiting traffic in the afternoon where it's already a challenge to make turns in and out of this driveway. That's all I have for you. If you have any questions. Again, special exception here, not a variance. Special exceptions of permitted use. The only objective criteria in the ordinance is that no outdoor storage is permitted, and that's agreeable to the client, that there will be no outdoor storage of materials and equipment.
Lonnie?
Yeah, what about off-peak hours of traffic coming in and out of there? Walton Road, I mean,
is there a limitation or restriction on?
I'm sorry, is there a limitation or restriction on when people can come in and out of this site? And, I'm thinking, like 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, trucks backing up, beep, 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 and that could be heard for miles around.
Yeah, I mean, Lonnie, there are still a few residences on the other side of the Goddard School, closer to Germantown Pike, but there are very few anymore in that general vicinity. I don't anticipate that there's any real significant concern, even if you have, required backup sirens, that those vehicles would be really impacting any of the homeowners. Again, you're talking more like 6 or 7 in the morning, I think, with these types of users, not 24-hour a day type of users. I think Goddard opens at 6:30, so there is traffic and there are people going up and down Walton Road at that hour.
What about weekends?
Usually very little use. It would depend specifically on the user there. If you do have an emergency plumbing contractor, they might need some weekend access. We don't, at this point, we have not had to have a discussion with somebody limiting, when they'd have access to the building. It is definitely possible, but again, it'd be off peak in the sense that at least Walton Road, Township Line Road are not busy. And again, I don't think that the impacts are going to be all that significant, just given the fact that everything else around there goes vacant over the weekend. I'm sorry?
Not everything.
Not everything,
There's
but
a whole neighborhood across the street.
true, behind the church, yes. And I used to always refer to it as Karen's neighborhood, so I think Karen Weiss. Okay, now it's your neighborhood. So, again, I don't anticipate that most of these users are going to be weekend intensive. There's no prohibition in the township ordinance against operations on the weekend. I would imagine that to the extent there is any, it would be relatively light. But again, it will depend on the specific tenant.
Right.
So it looks like there's about 20 buildings here? Is that what you have in the sketch?
20 spaces may be carved out. It could be more, it could be
If
less.
everybody has 5 trucks, that's like 100 trucks, right?
I agree with your math.
That's a lot of traffic. The other thing is, you're going to be trying to make a left-hand turn on Walton Road. At 3 o'clock's a tough time over there because of the school. So how's that all going to work out? It's bedlam over there at that point.
From about 3 to about 6:30, left-hand turns are unlikely out of this driveway. Technically, that driveway is a full movement driveway. It is permitted to have rights in, rights out, lefts in, lefts out. We don't anticipate making any changes to that driveway. But as with any of those users there, they're either going to have to wait for courtesy gaps to get out, or they're going to learn that they've just got to take a right-hand turn to go wherever they're going. I know that I did the approvals for the Goddard School. It's got to be almost 10 years ago now. And they're the same concept, same question, same potential problem. You have everybody picking up their kids, after work. How are they going to make lefts? There we were able to consolidate access with Apollo Road, which helped on that site. We don't have that ability to send traffic anywhere else. There is an informal connection to one of our adjoining properties that actually goes out to Township Line Road, but we did a title search and we don't have any legal rights to that access, and we think a school's going in there, some sort of school's going in there as well. Anyway, that's what I heard, but I'm not involved.
Yeah, it's a charter academy.
Charter Academy. And so we don't think that, one, it would be appropriate to have any of our vehicles going through where there's going to be a school, and we don't have that right. So we do only intend to utilize that existing driveway on Walton. And again, what we are trying to compare this to is this is a potentially leasable office building that could have up to 400 employees. And even if we do have 100 guys in vans, one, it tends to be more spread out, and two, that impact of traffic would be dramatically less than 400 employees coming and going from the site. So we understand that there's definitely from vacant to if this is occupied, that there will be a difference, but compared to what is permitted to go in there as of right with just a building permit, dramatically less, hopefully.
How many parking spaces are in the existing lot?
400, just over 400.
The overhead doors are marked on the plan, so that could be potentially garage style.
Yeah, a lot of, and again, this is just a concept drawing. We wanted people to see how it could be laid out inside. It could change. A lot of the contractors, if they're using the space, they want to back their box van right up, roll it up to a door and unload their materials. In most of the situations, you can see we're providing not only that overhead door, but also a man door. So if they don't require an overhead door for what they're doing, maybe it's more administrative for them and they don't need to bring things in right off their box truck, then those doors may not even be installed. Because right now, there's only a couple of loading docks and loading doors on the building. A lot of the old ones were closed up. And so that will be really on a tenant-driven basis if they want that. We're not anticipating tenants that are going to be getting tractor trailers. These tractor trailers typically require high loading docks, so it lines up with a tractor trailer. We're anticipating vans, box vans, things like that for these kinds of tenants.
I don't know whether my question is for you or you, but will they be allowed to park up the truck inside the building?
Might be more of a building code, fire code.
Yeah.
situation. I don't know if the zoning code would permit that.
Yeah, that's-
Building that-
Lonnie, do you know?
Have the capacity to deal with that?
Probably be a building code issue and fire code.
Yeah, it would be a ventilation issue as much as anything,
Our team's pretty good. If there is an issue there, they will call that out.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not going to be able to pull in a truck and have it sit there and idle with desks sitting next to it. It would certainly, to me, not be something acceptable, but backing it right up to it and unloading typically is acceptable because you're going to have the door open for that ventilation purpose. But again, it can be vetted all through that building permit process.
So they are anticipating storing vehicles overnight.
We think that there's going to be some tenants that are going to want fleet vehicles there.
So it says here, proposed use is only subject to the prohibition on exterior storage of materials and equipment.
Correct.
I'm going to recommend that there's no vehicles stored there overnight. I used to work for a contracting company that stored vehicles. I know the theft that goes on. I know the break-ins that go in. And given that there's a neighborhood right across the street, I do not want to bring more crime into the area.
Understood.
Looking to break into cars and trucks, steal copper, steal tools, and then start walking through the neighborhoods, looking to break into cars and stuff there. So if anyone motions this, I'm asking that we include the prohibition of stored vehicles overnight in the parking lot. Fleet vehicles, let's put it that way. Somebody leaves a car overnight.
Understood.
And given nobody else in the audience, do we have a motion?
Motion to the zoning hearing board to approve the use special exception for 3043 Walton Road with the acknowledgement that there won't be any storage of fleet vehicles overnight in the parking lot.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? One opposed.
Who's opposed?
Thank you, everybody.
Motion carried. Last item on the agenda, approval of March minutes. I don't know if the revised ones went out, so motion to approve the minutes with Monica's one change to fourth item, adding the park that was discussed. Motion to approve. Any seconds? All in favor of the minutes? Aye. Minutes approved. And any Any other off-agenda items or things to discuss?
You got, Joe, anything in the pipeline?
Yeah, we got some stuff, I'll stop them.